stuck here. The cops won't bother me. You know, I rode a Honda cb500 cross country, and I did own a cb500x prior to that particular cb500 that I rode cross country. So I do have a lot of experience with the cb500, and I wanted to kind of compare this one and the 500. The NC, the way it makes power, it's a completely different bike than the CB. So NC stands for new concept, and this is a new concept. I mean, I've done videos on this bike, and you guys know this is an odd, quirky motorcycle. The cb500 is more of a bike that a traditional motorcyclist would want, because the way it makes power is similar to a lot of motorcycles. It's got it's got less power at the bottom, right? And then it's got like a kick to it. You know, this bike doesn't have a kick to it. The motor on this is very different than the NC. So if you're looking at the engine, this direction is the direction of the engine of this, and on the NC it's like goes up and down. So this one, of course, doesn't have a gas tank. It has a very big compartment to store stuff. The cb500 seems to be a little bit more fun to ride if you're more into the spirited sort of riding, because it's more of a traditional motorcycle. It feels like you could ride that faster. You could probably have a little bit more fun if you're more into the spirited sort of riding. This NC is more of a concept bike, but yet more of a much better commuter than the CB. The cb500 also felt heavier than this NC. So in a way, I kind of wish that this had a 19-inch front wheel, because I think a lot of people would enjoy having this as a dual sport rather than the CB. The CB is more of a street bike, kind of like this, but with a little bit more pep. The engine is a little bit livelier. When it comes to top speed, the top speed on the CB is, I believe, like 97 miles per hour. You know, people claim that it goes 120, but they're just kind of like eating a lot of Fruit Loops. These bikes aren't fast. You know, a V-Strom 650 that I had, I got a top speed of like 110, 111, and I tested it for hours in the Nevada desert. So yeah, I'm sorry guys with cb500 that think your bike goes 120. It might go on the Speedo. The Speedo might say 120, but in reality it's like 90 something, because the Speedos are off in Japanese bikes. The cb500 also has a gas tank in a traditional position, which is here, and the rear, it's just a regular passenger seat. This one, of course, the gas tank is in the back seat, and you're actually sitting on the gas tank, so it keeps the weight much lower on the NC with this sort of system. And I think that's why it would make a much better dirt bike than the CB. Is this guy hitting his brakes for no reason, or what's going on here? Man, my hand is so cold. I wonder what I did to it. Also, one really great thing about this particular bike, if you use the CB as a commuter, most people will want some sort of like luggage. They will put like a top, you know, like the top box. This one doesn't need anything. In reality, it's like this truck is so big. It's such a big advantage for commuters to have the NC over the CB, because first, the weight is so much lower, and then you have the massive gas tank in the back, and then like this really big pocket of empty space right here, which is like a hard-shelled tank bag. and you can put your helmet. Your full-size helmet will fit here, so that's fantastic. Another super great benefit that only perhaps a few people like is the NC gets much better gas mileage than the CB because of the way the engine is, and because the way they made the engine. The NC gets upwards of 70 miles to the gallon. The CB gets like high 50s and low 60s. So that's not something that a lot of people would be into, except commuters. So for me, commuting is kind of important, and getting great mileage is important. So I do like the NC because of that. The way this thing also makes power is superior to the CB for low speed and city-like type of riding. Because the way it makes power, it's very linear. It doesn't have any spikes of power. Even though the CB doesn't have any like great spikes of power, it still has a much higher power band. This one is like a very easy, very gradual power band. So when you're dicing and slicing through traffic, this is a better bike for it. Suspension. When it comes to suspension, I think both bikes are lacking. They're kind of like budget bikes, and the suspension on these conventional sort of like cheap budget bikes are not particularly good. So one of the things I would do if I was to keep a bike for a long period is get much better suspenders. Springs, you can get the Race Tech gold emulators. That's going to make your bike operate much better. You need to kind of think about that. You know, you don't get this sort of bike for the power. Even though like this bike and the cb500 are probably about the same when it comes to power, the cb500 I think has an edge when it comes to riding twisties, but it's about the same. Like it has a lot more to do with the type of rider that's riding than the actual bike. But they all kind of seem to be about the same, and this one's a bigger engine, but I think they make the same amount of power, but don't quote me on that. Now the type of people that would get a CB over the 700 NC, I think it's about the same person. I think maybe the cb500 you can get better deals, because the NC is kind of an odd duck. That's an acquired taste, I believe. It's a quirky bike that I think only a few people desire it. And like I told you guys, I actually wanted the NC over the V-Strom before I bought the V-Strom, but the prices on these were much higher. So I ended up with a V-Strom that I got cheaper. But I would have been happy with, you know, any bike like the V-Strom or the NC, but I kind of am glad I went with the V-Strom. The V-Strom has a much like better power band, much more fun. The V-twin is lively, it's extremely reliable. But that's not to say that this bike is bad. And when you compare it to the CB, I think the CB, the older used CBs are a little cheaper than the NCs, and I think mainly because of the availability. The NCs are not really available very much. They're rare bikes. Now I have not ridden this bike at night yet, so I don't know how the visibility is on it, but I assume it's about the same as the cb500. But I think I prefer this one for commuting. You know, when I compare my V-Strom to the CB for commuting, I would rather have the CB because it's like thinner, narrower, gets better gas mileage. But when you compare the CB to this one for commuting, this one is a much better deal because it feels narrower. It feels actually smaller and shorter. It gets better gas mileage. The power is where you need it for like lower speeds. So in a way, this definitely makes it a much better commuter than the CB. When it comes to resale value, I believe the NC holds its value a little bit better than the CB. And one of the problems with the early cb500s is that they have the 17-inch wheels, kind of like this one. But because they developed the new cb500s to have the 19-inch front wheels to compete with the V-Strom, a lot of people want that one instead. So the prices on the old cb500s have actually gone down in price, and I've seen cb500s selling for like 2,500 bucks. So for that price, you know, that's super cheap, but that's what the older CBs are going for. This one is still selling of this year, 2012, for like $3,000 to $4,000. So you can see this one holds its value a little bit better. I think for me, the reason I would pick this bike over the CB is the novelty. It's a cool bike. I hate to say it, it just doesn't do anything particularly well, but it's so cool because of the gas tank and this big thing in the middle that I'm really growing to love. Just think about it. You have the battery right here. So instead of having, you know, the battery under the seat and then running cables to the handlebars for charging your phones and heated gear, you can actually just put it in here because the battery is right inside. That's incredible to me. Both the NC and the cb500 are terrible on the highway. I did ride the CB to Arizona from DC, and there was moments that I was in the highway and it just kind of gets blown around. But it's, in comparison to the V-Strom, the CB was terrible, and I assume that this one's terrible just because it is so light and so narrow. I mean, it does feel like you're riding a very thin bike through the air. On the CB, you could tell right away that it was just a bigger, massive bike physically. And in a way, I kind of thought, oh, that's actually, I do like the idea of having a narrower bike, but there is something beautiful about having a bike that's wide because it stops a lot of the wind from hitting the rider. The front brakes on this bike, that big single disc up front, you would think it's not good, but it's fantastic. This stops the bike really well. The cb500 is actually equivalent to this. Really good brakes, and the V-Strom is about the same. When it comes to presence, when you look at a BMW GS, for example, it's got a commanding presence on the highway. Because it's so large. I think the V-Strom had that as well because the plastic flared out a lot more. But this nc700 and the cb500 do not have a commanding presence on the highway. They just don't, because they're so thin and narrow. They actually physically are small bike. The presence of these bikes are so unintimidating that a lot of new riders could get on a CB and an nc700 and ride, because there's no you know, crazy amount of power. There's no tallness to the bikes. You know, these bikes are a little bit tall. I believe the cb500 seems to be a little bit taller, but so the cb500 maybe is a little bit taller, but both of these bikes are not intimidating for new riders. So if you're a new rider and you're looking to get a motorcycle, CB or the NC, both of them are equally good because they are very short. They do not make enough power to get you in trouble. You can be in whatever gear, 1 to 6 gear, twist the throttle, it's not going to come up on you. you'd have to work really hard to get a wheelie up on this thing. Both the cb500 and the nc700, to the uninitiated, they look almost exactly the same. They're very similar bikes. They have the same sort of styling, but the nc700 is very different, and I think that's what draws me to it. It's so weird and wacky, but yet nobody knows how weird and wacky it is. The cb500 is definitely more of a traditional bike, and I think a lot of people that ride motorcycles would probably get the cb500 over the NC. But the NC is so cool. It's so cool because it's wacky, and in my case I kind of like wacky, undervalued bikes like this. The more I ride this, the more I appreciate the value of the NC. But it really depends on what you want from a bike. This bike doesn't sound too good when I rev it. Look at this. Sounds like a big Ninja 250. Yeah, I'm sorry, nc700s and cb500 guys. Both bikes sound like crap. If you want a bike that sounds good, you really have to go 4-cylinder, 3-cylinder, or even 1-cylinder. One thing that's a big benefit with the nc700 that you don't hear a lot of people talk about is the fact that to live with the nc700 in the long haul is much better than the cb500. And the reason is very easy for maintenance. From the position of the battery to the way the engine is. For example, one of the things that you're going to have to be doing on the cb500 is valves. And I don't know much about the valves of the cb500, but on this NC, the way the engine faces forward, you don't have to remove anything up front here to get access to the entire top of the engine, so you can do valve adjustments. And the valve adjustments use a older style of adjustment that you can use a screw and a wrench to adjust. The old system, or the new system I should say, are using shims, and when you use the shim system, it's much harder because you have to remove the cams and you have to get the shims of the right size to fit in there, and it's so much more time consuming. This system of the NC is vastly superior to a lot of motorcycles, and even the home mechanic could do the adjustment on this bike. It's that easy. Alright squids, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Kinda stuck here. The cops won't bother me.